Yes, Senator.
I am highly concerned that this Department of Justice is politicizing the enforcement of justice. You've discussed how there is a priority focused on elections, and I recognize that there is a political focus on that, although, as you've told this committee, out of 1,000 complaints, it produced a total of 5 prosecutions, none of which involved violence, and all of the 5 were based on threats. Serious threats of violence should be investigated and should be prosecuted. However, in the weeks after the Dobbs opinion was leaked, pregnancy centers in Portland, Oregon, Manassas, Virginia, Austin, Texas, and Frederick, Maryland were targeted and vandalized. Violent extremist group Jane's Revenge took credit for fire bombings of crisis pregnancy centers in Madison, Wisconsin, in Amherst, New York, in Buffalo, New York, in Des Moines, Iowa, and in Gresham, Oregon. More recently, centers in North Carolina and in Washington, D.C., just 500 yards from where you're sitting right now, were covered with red paint, were egged, and were graffitied by pro-abortion radicals. As of July 22nd, there have been at least 82 violent attacks against pro-life institutions, including churches and crisis pregnancy centers. Despite these very real threats and violent attacks against pregnancy centers, DOJ instead, on July 12th, set up a special, quote, reproductive rights task force, not to protect pregnancy centers, but instead to advocate the political agenda of this administration of expanding unlimited abortion on demand. I have zero doubt that if pro-life supporters were vandalizing and firebombing abortion clinics across the country, DOJ would declare it a national emergency, and you might well send out the National Guard. But because your politics and the politics of the agency you work with happen to agree with the vandals, there has been no task force, there has been no priority. Why is that?
Senator, respectfully, I believe we agree that politics cannot and should not play any role in the investigative and prosecutorial decisions of the Department of Justice. We take very seriously any incidents of violence that occur within this country. I can tell you that those incidents that you're reflecting upon, if they are ultimately being considered by the Department of Justice, they will be taken.
Hold on a second. If they're being considered, you don't know sitting here today if they're being considered?
Senator, a number of these incidents are priorities in the focus not just of the criminal division, but of the civil division as well as our civil rights division.
Is there a task force?
Senator, it doesn't take a task force for us to have a prioritization of combating violence across this country.
Have any cases been brought?
Senator, I cannot comment on the existence of any current or pending investigations at this time.
Well, you're here commenting on the existence of when it meets the political priorities of the White House. All right, let me ask you a different question.
Yes, Senator.
Simultaneously, while violent terrorists are threatening pregnancy centers, we also have had protesters at the homes of Supreme Court justices night after night after night. Now, I believe protesting at someone's home, where your spouse sleeps, where your children sleep, is inherently threatening. It is designed to be threatening. And we know the violent rhetoric with the encouragement of Democratic members of Congress resulted in at least one deranged individual traveling from California to Maryland to attempt to murder Justice Kavanaugh. Now, as it so happens, Congress has addressed this issue. It's passed 18 U.S.C. Section 1507, making it a crime to protest at the home of a Supreme Court justice while a case is pending. Night after night after night, these protesters committed federal crimes on national television. Why has the Department of Justice refused to enforce 18 U.S.C. Section 1507?
Senator, very recently, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland, in fact, has prosecuted a defendant for unlawful conduct in front of the home of one of our Supreme Court justices.
So one person?
To date, there has been one prosecution.
And what about the hundreds of others? All of whom have violated the law. On the face of it, it's not complicated. The law is very clear. Why does the Department of Justice pick and choose which laws to enforce, which criminal laws to enforce, and why does it seem to exactly follow the pattern of the partisan preferences of the Biden White House?
Again, Senator, politics shouldn't play and does not play any role in our prosecutorial decisions. What I will also add is that our Attorney General has increased the U.S. Marshal Service's resources
But
that are
why has
brought
there
to bear
been
to
only one
protect our Supreme
prosecution
Court's
under Section
justices.
1507? Why have there not been any others?
Senator,
Does the department believe the law is unconstitutional? And if not, why are you refusing to enforce it?
respectfully, Senator, I disagree that we've chosen not to enforce it. Again, there's been one prosecution of a
Out of
defendant.
hundreds, what about the rest of the hundreds?
Senator, again, I cannot comment on the current status of potential investigations in this area.
Final question, was the one prosecution you referenced a 1507 prosecution, or was it something else?
I don't believe it was under that statute.
So you haven't brought a single one?
Again, I believe the conduct itself was the focus of the prosecution that you're
Well,
raising.
I think you need to follow the law.
There are no further senators seeking questions. Political violence in furtherance of any cause is unacceptable. I condemn all violence and threats of violence in the strongest possible terms, regardless of whether it comes from the right or the left, whether it targets election workers, judges, law enforcement officers, or other public officials. Unfortunately, abortion providers and reproductive health care clinics have long been the target of violence, threats, harassment, and intimidation. According to the FBI, actors motivated by anti-choice beliefs have historically perpetuated the most lethal attacks and also commit the majority of nonviolent criminal violations when it comes to attacks involving reproductive rights. Assaults directed at abortion clinic staff and patients increased 128% in 2021 compared to 2020, according to a report from the National Abortion Federation. Beyond the surge of assaults outside of clinics, the study also documented a 600% increase in stalking, 63% increase in burglary, 54% increase in vandalism, 163% increase in hoax devices or suspicious packages, 80% increase in bomb threats, 128% increase in invasions, including instances in which protesters forcefully entered clinics, and an increase in hate mail, harassing phone calls, and death threats. We know the FBI is investigating attacks and threats of violence following the overturning of Roe v. Wade and is working with local law enforcement. We need to take seriously all these violent threats. And I might add that this committee has passed legislation, sent it to the floor, which would provide additional resources to protect all federal judges after a terrible incident occurred in New Jersey. That measure has been on the floor for weeks at a time. It is being held up by one senator from the Republican side. That is a fact. We're trying our best to put the resources to protect our judges. We need cooperation on both sides of the aisle to achieve that. And I'll close by saying, as important as all of these issues of violence are, the nature and purpose of this hearing was to address the undermining of the integrity of America's election system. I happen to think that's fundamental too, and it goes to the heart of our constitutional form of government. I now thank the panel for their testimony. You may receive some written questions. I hope you'll respond to them in a timely way. Thank you very much. Ask the staff to set up the second panel for their testimony as well.